and welcome to PBCJ Presents, our weekly discussion series in which we examine some of the hot-button issues of the day. I am Simone Absalom Gale. This week, our focus is democracy and you. On January 19, the people of Barbados voted in a general election, opting for the second time in a row to give the Mia Mottley-led Barbados Labour Party all 30 seats in the House of Assembly. While the development came as a shock to many, this was not the first time we have seen a government in the region being given a clean sweep in consecutive elections. In recent history, Dr. Keith Mitchell and his new National Party in Grenada won all 15 seats in the 1999 election before scoring consecutive clean sweeps in 2013 and in 2018. But where is democracy in this scenario, where there is no political opposition? And is this something that we should expect to become more commonplace in the Caribbean? Joining us to discuss the issue is Sanjay Lewis, co-host on the Morning Agenda on Power 106 FM and adjunct lecturer in politics at the University of the Commonwealth Caribbean. Colvin Munsey, senior journalist at the Nation News in Barbados, who covered the recent election in Bridgetown. Nadine Spence, social and political commentator and member of the Crime Monitoring and Oversight Committee. And Damian Gordon, assistant lecturer of public policy and management and political science at the University of West Indies, Mona. Colvin, let's start with you. Did you expect this 30-0 result, and what caused this?
Well, that is a yes and no answer to that question. It is, on one hand, persons were expecting that the Democratic Labour Party would have had some resurgence, new leadership, and many were expecting that the whole idea of having some checks and balances for the Mia Mottley administration would have appealed to the masses. Places like St. John, St. Philip West, and St. Philip North, which were considered among the weaker in the Barbados Labour Party fold, many thought that those seats would at least return home. However, given the fact that the Mia Mottley administration would have received that overwhelming mandate only 3.5 years ago, many would not exactly be surprised that the feelings of the electorate had not changed much. In terms of why, it's a plethora of reasons. Some may say that the Democratic Labour Party didn't seem penitent enough, didn't seem as though that they would have learned their lessons that would have earned them that 30-0 defeat in 2018. And as a result, they got pretty much a second dose of the medicine.
Okay, Nadine, can we even talk about democracy, though, in a situation where there is no political opposition?
A political opposition does not a democracy make. That would be my response. Democracy has so much more tentacles to it than just the presence of an opposition. And of course, elections are important to a democracy, but they're by no means the only parts of a democracy. We have citizenship education, we have the courts or the law and the institutions which surround the law and how they ensure that the law is administered. There's a matter of even economic advancement and how people advance in a democracy. Democracy is multifaceted. So yes, the presence of the representatives of electoral democracy and the parliament and what happens in parliament is important. But it is not the only part of democracy. In fact, we can talk about two kinds of democracy: electoral democracy and substantive democracy. And we want democracy to be substantive. So we look at it as operating beyond the day of election. So I would judge my democracy not just on the opposition, the rule of law, economic advancement. We're talking about citizenship education, the role of the press, how citizens are engaged in the democracy throughout the life of a particular state. So, yes, I think even in with the absence of an opposition, especially in modern democracies, There are so many other ways that you keep a check on government, or that citizens participate in the democracy, or that citizens benefit from the democracy. So that we can talk about democracy. We can talk about the quality of our democracy, and beyond electoral democracies, and substantive democracy, and look at all the institutions that underpin a healthy democracy.
That's true. That's true. Very interesting point. There's some tidbits in there that I really want to delve into, but right now we're going to go to a break before we get into all the issues in terms of ensuring that the other facets of a democracy come into play when there is no opposition. Stay with us. PBCJ Presents. We'll be right back.
I wish to inform Jamaica that the government has already launched Operation Get Every Illegal Gun. My message today, therefore, is directed to the many young men who have illegal weapons in their possession, who hide the weapons, or as they say, lock them. And I'm speaking as well to the girlfriends, the baby mothers, the sisters and the mothers who give them cover and protection. I'm giving you warning. Put down the gun. Give it up. Leave the gang. Dissociate yourself from the gunmen. Otherwise, the consequences will be grim.
Echoes of Sound, the system shifts into higher gear this weekend with the semi-final rounds. Come ring the alarm this Friday, February 18, 9 p.m. when Next Level Sound system squares off with Rough Cut. And then Saturday, February 19, 9 p.m. Kush International versus Jam Rock. Echoes of Sound Systems. Semi-finals on PBCJ, JCDC Facebook page and across social media.
Jamaica is a beautiful place. Our people have a beautiful spirit. But we are too aggressive, and the way we interact with our friends and neighbors, I genuinely believe that we have the capacity to deal with this problem of violence. But it's going to take all of us. It's going to take every organized group of Jamaicans that we fundamentally reject violence. Violence has no place in a modern society.
Welcome back to PBCJ Presents. In this episode, we're discussing democracy and you, and particularly democracy when it comes to an administration which has majority numbers in the Houses of Parliament or the House of Assembly. Let's start with Damien. Given what has now happened in Grenada and Barbados, does there seem to be a need for constitutional amendment, perhaps with a view to safeguarding democracy as we know it?
I do believe that the development in Barbados in terms of one party winning all the seats is problematic from the perspective of our democracy, and context is very important. We don't have a democracy that has traditionally empowered non-government institutions and actors. So whilst we have a wide array of civil society organizations, we have other mediums of engagement outside of government, they have never been sufficiently empowered to really hold government accountable. In fact, in our kind of representative democracy, much of the power with respect to lawmaking and policy making is ceded to our members of parliament, who are also our lawmakers. So where we have only one political party being able to influence public policies and to influence laws, which has implications for all of us as citizens, not just now, but for the future, then that for me is very problematic. In fact, we associate the concept of single party rule with autocracies, with authoritarian regimes, and certainly not democracy. Again, given our historical context of how our democracy has operated, that further compounds issues as it relates to representativeness, consensus orientation, accountability, transparency, which are issues that we have that have been deficits in terms of our democracy function. I think constitutional reform.
Let's bring Colville. Before you move on, I really want to bring, you brought up an interesting point where you're talking about the role of civil society. I wanted to get Barbados into this because they're in this peculiar situation where you only have basically one political party in power now. Colville, what's the role now of the press and civil society? Do you have any groups that can efficiently keep the government in check?
Yes, we do. The thing is that Fourth Estate does have a major role to play in keeping the checks and balances of the government. There are also the trade union movements and other NGOs that also lend voice to the masses as well. However, I want to pick up on that point. These NGOs, these non-governmental organizations, trade unions, they are singular in focus. So, for example, if the issue of the day is a labor issue, then they would raise their voice on that. Where the absence and the deficit comes in is that alarm system that is vigilant on all issues. And that is where the opposition, I think, would definitely come into play. And in this case is absent.
But in terms of having multiple parties being a part of the legislature, currently in Barbados, we only have one party sitting in the legislature, which is the highest lawmaking institution in Barbados and certainly across most Commonwealth countries, which means that laws now are likely to be made in a manner that is based on the interests and considerations of the ruling party and not necessarily in a manner that is consensus-oriented or consultative, and that's problematic. However, I think that the constitutional reform would be appropriate in terms of perhaps looking at an alternative electoral system, one that ensures that there is a greater possibility or probability of other political parties, including minority political parties, being represented in the legislature.
Sanjay, let's get you in the conversation. Recently, you wrote an article in The Glean in which you called for fixed election dates. Why do you believe this is important, especially in this region?
Well, added to what Damian just rightly mentioned, we have to more look just generally at the fact that we need to adjust our electoral system with the idea of the proportional representation. But separate from that, I think we need to take the power from the hands of politicians where they can decide when they call an election. Because let's face it, politicians are going to call elections when it's in their favor. And, there's a lot of conversation going around in Barbados as to why Mia Mottley would have called the election. She had the advantage looking further, the IMF deal that is there, and possibly when the IMF deal is in effect or full effect, the people may be against her and, she'll be in the minority. So we have to take that responsibility or take that power, I should say, from the politicians and leave it that individuals, there's a level playing field that all sides can contend in the election. And if all sides can contend in the election and know in advance when that election will be held, you already have that level playing field to begin with.
This one goes to Nadine. In terms of the role of the voters now, what about their role in this kind of situation where you have majority or all the seats taken?
There were other parties on the ballot, and the voters, the citizens made a choice. That's an important part of a democracy, that election was the exercise of the rights of the citizens, and they chose a party. It doesn't automatically make it undemocratic. That's an important part of a democracy. They choose. That's an option available in a democracy for citizens to choose one party, and they did that. So we cannot automatically assume that because the citizens chose one party, that was where the majority vote is a feature of a democracy, and the results, respecting the results of an election is also a feature of a democracy. So we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can't automatically assume that it's going to have negative impacts on the society because the people chose the majority of the people chose one party. That's an option available in a democracy. And remember, democracy extends, as I said before, when we have conversations about democracy, we have to remember that an election does not a democracy make. There are so many other pointers for us to have a conversation on as to the quality of democracy, other than just the elections. The elections is but the starting point of a conversation about democracy.
Okay, so this is a very hot topic. You're hearing so many views on this topic. We're going to take a break and we'll be right back, and we'll allow Nadine to continue her point in terms of establishing that there are other aspects of democracy that we can lean on when we find ourselves in a situation where one political party has majority, or in the case of Barbados, all the seats in their houses of parliament or their house of assembly. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
What if they knew that you abused her? Her family?
Mr. Jones.
And your colleagues, how will they look at an abuser? When the law comes knocking, you'll have nowhere to run.
Mr. Brown, you're under arrest. Please get up, hands behind your head and interlock your fingers.
Turn your back on abusers. Report gender-based violence to the police. There's no excuse for abuse. Call the Bureau of Gender Affairs at 876-754-8577.
3 factors can help you make safe choices when you're in an area of widespread COVID-19 transmission. Consider the location, the proximity to others, and the amount of time you spend there. Where does your activity take place? Open-air spaces are always safer than enclosed spaces, particularly if they're small or without fresh air. Proximity to other people is also important. It's safest when there are fewer people around and you can keep more than 1 meter apart. How long does your activity last? The shorter, the better. Think about each of these factors and avoid situations where the risk dial is high. Small or poorly ventilated places and crowds of people for long periods of time. Stay safe. Lower the risk to yourself and others.
Join PBC Jamaica for A Different Life, a window into the world of persons with disabilities. Sundays at 10 a.m. with a repeat on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. That's A Different Life, right here on PBC Jamaica, the People's Station.
Welcome back to PBCJ Presents, and we're focusing on democracy and you, particularly what happens when there is a majority of members of parliament in a government running a country, or as in the case of Barbados, when one political party wins all the seats in a general election. We're speaking with Nadine. She was explaining to us how we can lean in on other aspects of democracy when we find ourselves in this situation. Continue.
So if we look beyond the elections and look, what else do we look for to judge the quality of our democracy? People's freedom of speech being impinged on, freedom of assembly. What about when people decide that they no longer want this government? Do they have the right to an election and a right to change their mind as to who they want to be, to form the next government? You know, will this government seek to change the constitution such that we have a president or a prime minister who declares him or herself prime minister for life? Does the constitution speak to that? What about the rule of law? Is the government seeking to change the rule of law in one interest or the other, or you know, is there independence of the branches of government, at least in our state? in our situation in the Caribbean, to an extent, we don't have full independence. But what about just other? There are so many other things that we could talk about. And again, I talk about freedom of the press. Is this a government that is seeking to hamper the work of the press in its execution of its responsibilities as a check on government as well?
You brought up several issues. The role of the media. Really want to get into that, Colvin. In the absence of political opposition, are we likely to see the media and civil society groups playing a more important role in terms of keeping the administration in check? In Jamaica, I know we have the Press Association of Jamaica that will come out once in a while to say, hey, the media is being muzzled, or the administration has gone awry in such and such situation. Do you have a group like that in Barbados?
Yes, we have BAJAM, which is our media association. However, that's a fledgling association in a sense that it's, I think it was only revived, was dormant for a while, and it was only revived about 3 years ago. So in terms of its strength and ability to really stand up to any attempts to muzzle, I'm not saying that there is any attempt to muzzle the press. I'm not sure if they are in a position to do so. However, the individual media houses are very mature media houses. You have the Advocate, over 100 years old, Nation, that's the Nation News, that's I think 70 plus years old. And these are very mature establishments, and basically quite capable of stepping up to the plate and raising concerns at any attempt, raising the alarm, sorry, at any attempt to try to curtail freedom of the press in any way. In terms of civil society, I think that there is a pretty good base from which the voices of the people can be heard.
All right, Damien, I really want to get your opinion on this, and of course Sanjay as well. The other option, to establish a third political party. I know I've been hearing discussions in Jamaica about that, to ensure I'm afraid to say, but I could, the continuation of our democracy if such a situation occurs. Tell me about this new political party that's been coming up.
Yeah, so just an important starting point. Even though there may be multiple or several political parties on a ballot, it does not mean that the playing field is level.
That's why
so the notion that citizens may have a choice, you have to kind of dissect the idea of choice and what it means. Because you find that in most Caribbean democracies, you have two major political parties that have a large support base. They receive significant levels of funding from the private sector. They can mobilize significant resources. The third parties may not be in such a position. So even though they're on the ballot, technically, they're not as attractive or as organized as options as the two major political parties. Again, it requires funding to finance an election campaign, to do the groundwork, to get across the country, speak to the voters, advertise, etc. Third parties usually have issues when it comes down to sourcing funding, and therefore the playing field is not level. So while it may appear that voters have a choice, they don't really have an equal opportunity to vet or to assess all political parties equally. And therefore, the processes are skewed towards the major political parties and not the third-party options, right? So we have the UIC in Jamaica that is using social media in particular as a means of marketing itself and getting voters engaged. However, the problem that the UIC faces is, in order for you to, for example, become a part of the legislature, you have to win a seat outright. Can the UIC feel a candidate that is able to win a seat, a constituency? It is very difficult for the UIC to be effective in this kind of system where you have to win a seat outright in order to become a part of the legislature. It means that the UIC has to win a seat in a particular constituency, which is very difficult in our kind of system.
Okay, let's quickly bring Sanjay into this. Sanjay, you have 10 seconds. Your opinion on a third party or any Any other aspect of our political landscape that you would change to ensure that democracy continues in the way that we're used to?
Let's face it, elections are not cheap, and it's a very expensive venture. And I think that if we're looking at having third parties functioning in our society, we have to look at changing our system. We currently operate under the first past the post system, which makes it very difficult for third parties to operate. We may very well have to look at the proportional representation, which gives them a better chance of getting a seat in the parliament. And Damien said it also, that we may also have to look at party financing, and campaign financing. But when we look generally at the idea of campaign financing, people within the Caribbean are not so minded to fund political parties from the public purse. So we may very well just have to look at changing the system from the first past the post to proportional representation to give third parties that choice or that opportunity to have a seat in the parliament.
All right, you've been watching PBCJ Presents Democracy and You, Safeguarding Regional Democracy. Thanks to my special guests, Sanjay Lewis, co-host on the Morning Agenda on Power 106 FM and adjunct lecturer in politics at the University of the Commonwealth Caribbean, Colvin Mosley. He is a senior journalist at Nation News in Barbados, and Nadine Spence, social and political commentator, and Damien Gordon, assistant lecturer of public policy and management at the political science at the University of the West Indies, Mona. Join us again at the same time on the same channel right here on PBCJ for another installment of PBCJ Presents. Pleasant viewing.